Admiral Taemin stood in the center of the conference room, looking at the large screen that showed the faces of alien leaders from across the galaxy. The blue light from the hologram made his weathered face look even more serious than usual. He had been in many difficult meetings before, but this one felt different. This one felt like a trap. The creature speaking to him looked like a giant insect. Its name was High Chancellor Vextar, and it ruled the Galactic Confederation. The Chancellor's voice came through the translator as cold metal clicks and buzzes, but the words were clear enough. Too clear. The new tribute requirements are simple, Vextar said, its large black eyes reflecting no emotion. Earth will provide 40% of all food grown on your planet. Earth will give us complete control of all rocks and metals in space around your world. And Earth will send 100,000 of your soldiers to serve in our armies. Taemin felt his jaw muscles tighten, but he kept his face calm. Behind him, Dr. Hee-jin watched from the observation area. She was Earth's best expert on alien life and had been his advisor for 10 years. She knew him well enough to see the anger building behind his controlled expression. The demands were impossible. 40% of Earth's food would mean millions of people would starve. The asteroid belt contained the metals and minerals that kept Earth's space industry alive. And sending 100,000 soldiers was just another way of saying the aliens wanted hostages. These terms seem quite different from our previous agreements, Taemin said carefully. His voice was steady, but inside he was calculating. 300 years. That's how long the Galactic Confederation had controlled space travel between the stars. Every species that wanted to move between worlds had to pay them, obey them, and accept whatever demands they made. Earth had joined the Confederation 30 years ago. Back then, the tribute had been reasonable. Some rare metals, some technology sharing, some diplomatic cooperation. The humans had paid their bills and followed the rules like everyone else. But the demands had grown larger every year. Your species has shown concerning signs of independence, Kya, another voice said. This came from General Mordak, a creature that looked like a walking tree with too many arms. The Confederation Council has decided that stronger measures are needed to ensure proper integration. Hee-jin shifted in her seat. She had studied dozens of alien species, and she knew what proper integration meant. It meant becoming slaves. The Confederation had done this to other worlds before. They would slowly increase the tribute until the target species could barely survive, then offer protection in exchange for complete surrender. The terms are not open for discussion, Vextar continued. You have 30 standard days to begin compliance. Failure to meet these requirements will result in economic sanctions and military intervention. Taemin nodded slowly. I understand your position. However, such significant changes to our relationship require careful consideration by Earth's government. We will need time to review these new requirements. Time? General Mordak's branches rustled with what might have been laughter. Your primitive species always asks for more time. Very well. You have 72 hours to provide your answer. But understand this clearly. These terms will be accepted, or Earth will face the consequences. The hologram flickered and disappeared, leaving the conference room in darkness. Emergency lighting came on a moment later, bathing everything in a soft red glow. Taemin stood motionless for several seconds, staring at the empty space where the alien faces had been. They've finally done it, Hee-jin said quietly as she approached him. They've crossed the line. Yes, Taemin replied. The question is whether they realize what they've just done. Hee-jin knew what he meant. The Galactic Confederation had made their demands based on old information. They still thought of humans as a primitive species that had stumbled into space travel by accident. They believed that Earth was just another weak world that would bend under pressure like all the others. They were wrong. For 30 years, ever since first contact, humanity had been learning. Every alien ship that visited Earth, every piece of technology the Confederation had sold them, every inspection of Earth's facilities, the humans had been watching, studying, and most importantly, understanding. Have you briefed the president yet? Taemin asked. I sent the preliminary report 20 minutes ago. He's calling an emergency session of the Security Council for tonight. Good. Make sure General Boram is included, And get me a secure line. To the Alpine facility. Hye-jin raised an eyebrow. The Alpine facility was one of Earth's most classified locations. Very few people even knew it existed, let alone what went on inside its underground laboratories. Are we really going to do this? She asked. They demanded soldiers, Taemin said grimly. They're going to get a war instead. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, other species were receiving similar demands. The Confederation had decided it was time to tighten their control over their territory. For 3 centuries, they had been the ultimate power in known space, and they intended to keep it that way. On the mining world of Kepler Prime, the dog-like Canary received orders to double their ore production. On the agricultural planet of New Harvest, the plant-based Verdani were told to surrender their seed banks. On the ocean world of Aquatica, the fish-like Pelagic were commanded to provide genetic samples of their entire population. The pattern was the same everywhere. Increased tribute, reduced independence, and implied threats of violence for anyone who refused to comply. The Confederation had grown comfortable with their power, and they saw no reason to be gentle about using it. But Earth was different, even if the aliens didn't know it yet. In the underground bunkers beneath Geneva, President Minho reviewed the demands with growing anger. Around the conference table sat the most powerful people on Earth: military commanders, scientists, diplomats, and intelligence chiefs. They all wore the same expression of barely controlled fury. 40% of our food production, Minister of Agriculture Kyung-soo read from his tablet. That would trigger famine conditions in Asia and Africa within 6 months. The asteroid, mining rights represent 60% of our off-world income, added economic advisor Sung Min. Without those resources, our space program would collapse. And 100,000 soldiers, General Boram said quietly. They're not asking for volunteers. The document specifically mentions conscription quotas and mandatory service periods. They want to turn our people into their slaves. President Minho looked around the table. Options? We could try negotiating, suggested Foreign Minister Yoon-ji. Offer alternative arrangements, maybe spread the tribute over a longer period. They said the terms weren't open for discussion, Boram reminded her. This isn't a negotiation, it's a surrender demand. What about other species? Could we form some kind of alliance? Intelligence Director Young-soo shook his head. Every species that's tried to resist the Confederation has been isolated and crushed. The Zephyrians tried to form a defensive alliance 15 years ago. The Confederation cut off all gate access to their worlds and let them starve until they surrendered. Which brings us to the real question, President Minho said. Are we ready? The room fell silent. Everyone knew what he was asking about, but few were authorized to know the details. The project that had been hidden in the Swiss Alps for the past 5 years. The breakthrough that could change everything. General Boram nodded slowly. According to the latest reports, yes, the technology is ready for deployment. And the consequences? Unknown, but probably severe. Once we use it, there's no going back. The Confederation will know that their control isn't as absolute as they thought. President Minho stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the lights of Geneva sparkled in the darkness. Somewhere up there, alien ships were probably watching, waiting for Earth's response to their impossible demands. 72 hours, he said quietly. That's what they gave us. I think it's time they learned what humans do when someone tries to make them slaves. The war was about to begin, but the Galactic Confederation didn't know it yet. They were about to discover that some species couldn't be bullied, and some demands should never be made. Earth's response would change the galaxy forever. 3 months before the Confederation's ultimatum, Dr. Dong-hyun stared at the equations floating in the air above his desk. The holographic display showed thousands of lines of mathematical formulas, each one representing years of work. Behind him, the underground laboratory hummed with the sound of computers working at full capacity. The facility beneath the Swiss Alps was officially called the Advanced Physics Research Center, but everyone who worked there knew its real purpose. For 5 years, the brightest minds on Earth had been trying to solve one specific problem. How did the aliens control space travel between the stars? The energy readings don't match, said Sujin, looking up from her workstation. She was the lead engineer on the project, and her job was to make sense of the practical side of the alien technology. According to their public specifications, these gates should require 10 times more power than they actually use. Jaewon, the team's mathematician, nodded in agreement. The theoretical framework they provided has gaps in it. Big ones. Either they're lying about how the technology works or they don't fully understand it themselves. Dong-hyun had suspected this for months. The Galactic Confederation claimed to have invented hyperspace gate technology, but their explanations never made complete sense. When human scientists asked detailed questions, the aliens would give vague answers about proprietary systems and classified research. "Show me the quantum signature analysis again," Dong-hyun said. Sujin touched her tablet, and the holographic display changed. Now it showed wave patterns, the unique quantum signatures that every hyperspace gate produced when it opened a tunnel through space. The patterns looked almost random at first, but after years of study, the human team had started to see something else. "There!" Jaewon pointed to a specific section of the display. "Do you see how the frequency modulation repeats every 47 seconds? That's not random. That's a control signal." "And look at this," Sujin added, highlighting another part of the pattern. "These amplitude spikes happen at exactly the same time across all gates in the network, even gates that are thousands of light years apart." Dong-hyun felt his heart beat faster. "They're synchronized. The entire network is connected." This was the breakthrough they had been searching for. The hyperspace gates weren't independent devices. They were all part of one massive system, controlled from somewhere else. Every gate was like a computer terminal connected to the same network. "If that's true," Jaewon said slowly, "then someone has master control over the entire system." "The Confederation," Sujin whispered. "They don't just use the gates, they control them, all of them." The implications were staggering. For 300 years, every species in the galaxy had believed that hyperspace travel was simply available technology, like electricity or nuclear power. You built a gate according to the specifications, you paid the licensing fees, and you could travel between the stars. But it wasn't true. The Confederation had never shared the real technology. They had only provided the plans for terminals, devices that could connect to their network, but only with their permission. Every ship that traveled through hyperspace was using the Confederation's gates, under the Confederation's control. "We need to test this theory," Dong-hyun said. "Can we trace the control signals back to their source?" Sujin was already working on her tablet. "I can try to map the network topology, but it'll take some time. The signals are heavily encrypted." "How long?" "Give me 3 weeks, maybe 4. Dong-hyun nodded. "Do it and keep this information restricted. If we're right about this, it changes everything." The next 4 weeks were the longest of Dong-hyun's life. He continued his regular research, attended meetings, and filed reports, but his real attention was focused on Sujin's network analysis. Slowly, piece by piece, the true structure of the hyperspace system began to emerge. The Confederation hadn't just built a transportation network, they had built a control system that allowed them to monitor and regulate every movement between the stars. They could open or close gates at will, redirect ships to different destinations, or shut down entire sectors of space. "It's brilliant," Jaewon admitted reluctantly. "Evil, but brilliant. They convinced everyone that they were just collecting taxes and fees for using the gates. But really, they were maintaining absolute control over who could go where. And if anyone tried to resist them," Sujin added, "they could just cut off that species' access to space travel. Instant isolation." But understanding the system was only the first step. The real question was whether humanity could do anything about it. The Confederation's control network was protected by layers of encryption and security protocols that had taken them centuries to develop. That's when Dong-hyun made his second breakthrough. "They made a mistake," he announced to his team during a late-night meeting. "A big one." "What kind of mistake?" Sujin asked. "They've been selling us access terminals for 30 years. Every gate we've built, every ship we've equipped with hyperspace drives. They all connect to the Confederation network. But to make those connections work, they had to give us some of the low-level access codes. J1's eyes widened. Are you saying we can hack into their system? I'm saying we already have access to their system. We just need to figure out how to use it. The work that followed was the most intense period of Dong-hyun's career. His team worked 18-hour days analyzing code, mapping network pathways, and testing theories. They discovered that the Confederation's network had thousands of security layers, but many of them were designed to keep people out, not to stop someone who was already inside. Humans had been connecting to the network for 3 decades. From the Confederation's perspective, Earth was just another client species with limited access privileges. But limited access was still access, and human computer specialists were very good at finding ways to expand their privileges. I think I've found something, Sujin said one morning. She looked exhausted but excited. The network has maintenance protocols, ways for technicians to test and repair gates remotely. If we can access those protocols, we could control the gates ourselves, Dong-hyun finished. Not just control them, Jae-won added, studying the code Sujin had discovered. We could shut them down, selectively or completely. The room fell, silent as the full implications sank in. The Confederation's power rested entirely on their control of hyperspace travel. Without the gates, their vast empire would be reduced to isolated star systems, each one suddenly months or years away from the nearest ally. We need to test this, Dong-hyun said finally. But carefully. If the Confederation discovers what we're doing, they'll consider it an act of war, Sujin agreed. Which system should we test on? Dong-hyun thought for a moment. Proxima Centauri. It's close enough for us to monitor, but far enough away that any problems won't affect Earth directly. And there's only one inhabited planet there. If we make a mistake, we won't strand millions of people. The test was scheduled for a Tuesday morning. Dong-hyun's team had spent weeks preparing, running simulations and double-checking their code. They had built safeguards and backup plans, but everyone knew they were venturing into dangerous territory. Initiating network penetration, Sujin announced. Her fingers moved quickly over her controls as she accessed the Confederation's maintenance systems. I'm in. Locating Proxima gate controls. Found them. Status of the Proxima system? Dong-hyun asked. 2 cargo ships en route to the gate, estimated arrival in 6 hours, no military vessels detected. Good. Begin the test sequence. For the next hour, they carefully probed the Proxima gate's control systems. They tested their ability to access diagnostic information, modify routing protocols, and adjust power levels. Everything worked exactly as their theories predicted. Finally, Dong-hyun gave the order they had all been waiting for. Shut it down. Sujin pressed a single key on her tablet. On the main display, the Proxima gate's status indicator changed from green to red. Gate offline, she reported. Complete system shutdown confirmed. They had done it. For the first time in 300 years, someone other than the Galactic Confederation had controlled a hyperspace gate. And they had done it from 8,000 light-years away, using nothing but the access codes the aliens had provided themselves. How long before they notice? Jae-won asked. Hard to say, Dong-hyun replied. Could be hours, could be days. The Proxima system isn't very important to them. As it turned out, it took the Confederation 4 days to realize something was wrong with the Proxima gate. When they tried to investigate, they found that their own diagnostic systems showed everything was functioning normally. The gate appeared to be working perfectly. It just wasn't letting anyone through. By the time they figured out what had happened, it was too late. Earth had tested and refined their gate control capabilities, and they were ready for the war that was coming. The Galactic Confederation had spent 3 centuries controlling the galaxy through technology. They were about to learn that technology could be turned against them by people who understood it better than they did. The balance of power in the galaxy was about to shift, and the aliens didn't even know it yet. The 72 hours passed faster than anyone expected. Admiral Taemin stood on the bridge of Earth's primary defense station, watching the sensor displays that showed empty space around Luna. The Confederation had been quiet since delivering their ultimatum, but intelligence reports suggested that was about to change. "Sir," Communications Officer Hyunwoo called out from his station, "we're detecting hyperspace distortions near the outer system. Multiple contacts, large signatures." "How many?" Taemin asked. "Initial count shows 20 vessels. Sir, these are big ships, capital-class warships." Dr. Hae-jin, who had been monitoring the situation from Earth's command center, appeared on the main screen via secure transmission. "The Confederation is making their point clear. That's 3 full battle fleets." Admiral Colthax of the Hegemony Fleet watched his forces emerge from hyperspace with satisfaction. 300 ships, including some of the most powerful vessels in the Confederation Navy. The humans had been given their chance to surrender peacefully, and they had wasted it. "Status report," Colthax demanded. "All ships have successfully transitioned to normal space," his tactical officer reported. "No signs of resistance from the human vessels. Their defense platforms appear to be powered up, but they're maintaining position." "Laughable." Colthax's mandibles clicked in amusement. "Begin standard intimidation protocol. Broadcast surrender demands on all frequencies." The message that went out across the Sol system was simple and direct. Earth had 10 minutes to announce their complete surrender and begin loading tribute ships. Any delay or resistance would result in the destruction of Earth's military installations and the orbital bombardment of major population centers. On Earth's defense station, Taemin listened to the demands with a calm expression that hid his growing anticipation. Behind him, his staff prepared for what was about to happen. They had been planning this moment for months. "Sir," Hyunwoo reported, "the Confederation fleets are moving into attack formation. They're targeting our defense platforms and the Luna shipyards. Any response to our warnings about the 10-minute deadline?" "Nothing, sir. They appear to be proceeding with their attack plan." Taemin nodded. "Very well. Signal all stations. Execute Operation Gatekeeper." 8 minutes and 30 seconds after the Confederation's ultimatum expired, every hyperspace gate in the Sol system simply stopped working. Admiral Colthax was reviewing the targeting solutions for Earth's moon when his navigation officer suddenly looked up in alarm. "Sir, we have a problem. The hyperspace gates have gone offline." "What do you mean offline?" "I mean they're not responding to any commands. Navigation, communication, even basic status queries. Nothing is getting through." Colthax felt a cold sensation in his stomach. Without the gates, his fleets were trapped in the Sol system. Worse, they were cut off from reinforcements and resupply. "It must be some kind of technical malfunction," he said, though he didn't really believe it. "Continue with the attack plan. We'll worry about the gates after we've secured the human. Surrender." But the gate shutdown was only the beginning of humanity's response. On the bridge of the Earth vessel Defiance, Captain Yunseo watched as her sensors detected the Confederation fleet movements. The Defiance was one of Earth's newest ships, built using technology that the aliens had never seen before. "Ma'am," her tactical officer Young Min reported, "the lead Confederation vessels are approaching firing range of the Luna defense platforms. Any change in the gate status?" "No, ma'am. All hyperspace activity in the system has ceased. The Confederation fleets are completely cut off." Yunseo smiled grimly. "Then let's show them what that means. Signal the defense platforms. Weapons free." The battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. The Confederation had grown used to fighting against primitive species with inferior technology and limited resources. They expected to overwhelm Earth's defenses through sheer firepower and superior numbers. They were not prepared for what humanity had built during 30 years of careful preparation. Earth's defense platforms opened fire with weapons that shouldn't have existed. Particle beams that cut through Confederation shields like they weren't there. Missile systems that could track and destroy targets at impossible ranges. Energy weapons that drew power from sources the aliens couldn't identify. "Impossible," Admiral Colthax whispered as he watched his flagship's sensors try to make sense of what they were seeing. Those energy readings are off the scale. How are they generating that much power? His science officer, a nervous creature, named Veltar, checked his instruments again. Sir, I'm detecting controlled fusion reactions on a scale I've never seen before. Each of those platforms appears to have its own miniature star powering it. That's impossible. Fusion containment. Technology that advanced would require a complete understanding of quantum field dynamics, Veltar finished quietly. Sir, I think we may have seriously underestimated this species. The realization came too late. Within the first hour of battle, the Confederation had lost nearly a third of their ships. The survivors found themselves facing an impossible choice: continue the attack and face complete destruction, or surrender to a species they had considered primitive. The decision was made for them when the human defense platforms demonstrated their true capabilities. Admiral Colthax's flagship, the Dominator, was a mile-long vessel that had never been seriously damaged in 3 centuries of service. Its shields had withstood the weapons of a dozen different species, and its armor was legendary throughout the galaxy. The Earth defense platform that targeted it fired a single shot. The beam that struck the Dominator lasted for exactly 2.3 seconds. When it ended, the ship's shields were gone, its armor had been vaporized, and its superstructure had been cut cleanly in half. The mighty flagship of the Hegemony fleet broke apart and began falling toward Earth's moon. All ship, Colthax broadcast on the emergency frequency. Cease attack immediately. Broadcast surrender signals on all channels. But the damage to the Confederation's position went far beyond a single battle in the Sol system. Across the galaxy, other species were discovering that the hyperspace gates had stopped working everywhere. Captain G1 of the Earth Intelligence Service monitored the situation from a hidden listening post in the Vega system. Ma'am, her communications specialist, Sangman reported, we're intercepting panic signals from Confederation worlds across 17 sectors. They're all reporting the same thing: complete gate network failure. What about the client species? That's where it gets interesting. The Centauri Republic has just declared independence from the Confederation. The Altair Mining Consortium is refusing to honor their tribute contracts, and the Rigel Colonial Assembly has seized control of all Confederation facilities in their territory. G1 nodded with satisfaction. This was exactly what Earth's strategists had hoped would happen. The Confederation's power had always depended on their ability to move forces quickly between different parts of their territory. Without that ability, their vast empire was just a collection of isolated worlds. On Earth, President Minho received regular updates from intelligence stations across the galaxy. The picture that emerged was one of complete chaos in Confederation space. Status report from all sectors, he requested during an emergency cabinet meeting. Defense Minister Young Soo consulted his tablet. Sir, we've successfully isolated 847 Confederation core worlds. Their reaction fleets can't reach any of the rebellion sites, and their colonial territories are declaring independence faster than we can track. Any attempts to restore gate functionality? Several, but they all failed. Dr. Dong Hyun's team has confirmed that the Confederation doesn't understand their own network well enough to override our shutdown protocols. President Minho allowed himself a small smile. And our own fleet positions? Defiance and her sister ships are monitoring key strategic points throughout human space. Captain Yun Seo reports that several Confederation squadrons have attempted to enter our territory through conventional space travel, but they're moving too slowly to be effective. The transformation of the galactic balance of power was happening, faster than anyone had predicted. Species that had been under Confederation control for centuries were suddenly free to act without fear of immediate retaliation. Colonial worlds that had been sending tribute for generations began keeping their resources for themselves. Within 48 hours of the gate shutdown, the Galactic Confederation had effectively ceased to exist as a functioning government. But Admiral Colthax, now a prisoner aboard his own ship, was still struggling to understand what had happened. I don't comprehend this, he said to Admiral Taman during the surrender negotiations. Your species was classified as Level 3 technological development. Primitive space travel, limited energy production, basic material science. How did you develop weapons capable of defeating our fleets? Taemin's expression was polite but cold. You made the mistake of thinking that technological classification was permanent. We've been learning for 30 years. Learning what? We shared no advanced military technology with your species. You shared something much more valuable, Dr. Hyjin interjected via the communication link. The collapse of the Galactic Confederation happened faster than anyone thought possible. Within a week of the gate shutdown, reports were coming in from across the galaxy about species rising up against their former masters. The network that had controlled space travel for 3 centuries had become the weapon that destroyed the government that built it. Admiral Zefcon of the Third Fleet found himself trapped in the Rigel system, watching helplessly as the very species his forces had been sent to pacify turned their weapons against Confederation installations. His ships were powerful, but they were designed for quick strikes and rapid withdrawal. Now that withdrawal was impossible. Sir, his communications officer reported with barely controlled panic. The Rigel colonies have seized control of the orbital shipyards. They're broadcasting demands for our immediate surrender. On what authority? Zefcon demanded. They're claiming independence from the Confederation, sir. They say that since the central government can no longer provide protection or services, all previous treaties are void. Zefcon felt his confidence cracking. He had 36 warships under his command, enough firepower to level the Rigel colonies completely. But if he did that, he would be stranded in this system forever with no way to return home and no way to resupply his fleet. Similar scenes were playing out across hundreds of star systems. Confederation fleets that had been dispatched to intimidate rebellious colonies now found themselves cut off and outnumbered by the very people they had been sent to suppress. On Earth, the Situation Room buzzed with constant activity as reports flowed in from intelligence stations throughout the galaxy. President Minho studied the latest updates with a mixture of satisfaction and concern. The Confederation military is in complete disarray, Intelligence Director Young-Soo reported. Most of their fleets are either trapped in hostile territory or desperately trying to reach home through conventional space travel. How long would it take them to return to their core worlds without the gates? Depends on the distance, but we're talking about months or years for most units. The third fleet in Rigel would need 18 months just to reach the edge of Confederation space. Dr. So-Young, who had been studying the technical aspects of the gate shutdown, looked up from her tablet. Sir, we're also seeing some unexpected consequences. The Confederation's economy was completely dependent on rapid transport of goods and materials between their worlds. Without the gates, some of their core systems are already experiencing shortages. President Minho nodded grimly. How severe? The hegemony homeworld imports 60% of its food from agricultural colonies. The industrial world of Forge relies on raw materials from mining operations in 12 different systems. Without regular shipments, they're looking at economic collapse within months. This was the part of the plan that had worried Earth's leadership from the beginning. Shutting down the gate network would certainly break the Confederation's power, but it would also cause massive disruption to billions of innocent people who depended on interstellar trade for survival. Options for humanitarian relief? President Minho asked. We're working on it, Dr. Hyjin said via the communication link from her laboratory. Dr. Donghyun's team believes they can restore selective gate access to allow humanitarian shipments while maintaining the strategic isolation of Confederation military forces. Meanwhile, on the captured Confederation flagship in Earth orbit, Admiral Taemin was conducting interrogations of the senior officers. What he learned painted a disturbing picture of an empire that had grown corrupt and complacent over centuries of unchallenged power. You have to understand, the captured Admiral Colthax explained. The Confederation wasn't always like this. 300 years ago, we genuinely believed we were bringing peace and prosperity to the galaxy. What changed? Taemin asked. Success, Colthax replied bitterly. When you control everything, when no one can challenge your authority, when tribute flows from 1,000 worlds, it becomes easy to believe you deserve it all. Dr. Namjin, Earth's specialist in alien psychology, had been observing the interrogations. Tell me about the tribute system. How did it become so extensive? It started small, Colthax admitted. Voluntary contributions to maintain the gate network. But as our administrative costs grew, as our military expanded to protect more territory, the contributions became mandatory, and then they became excessive. How excessive? Some worlds were paying 80% of their gross production in tribute. We told ourselves it was necessary for galactic stability, but really, it was just because we could demand it and they couldn't refuse. Taemin exchanged glances with Dr. Namjin. This was exactly what they had suspected. The Confederation had become a protection racket on a galactic scale, using their control of space travel to extract wealth from every species under their rule. What about the military conscription demands? Taemin asked. That was a recent development, Colthax said uncomfortably. High Command was concerned about the growing independence movements in some sectors. They thought that having mixed units with soldiers from client species would make rebellion more difficult. In other words, you wanted hostages. We called them integration forces. But yes, that's essentially what they were. The more Earth's leaders learned about the Confederation's methods, the more convinced they became that dismantling the system had been the right choice. But the immediate problem was dealing with the chaos that dismantling had created. In the Altair system, Captain Mi Young of the Earth Diplomatic Corps was attempting to mediate between the newly independent mining consortium and a trapped Confederation patrol fleet. The negotiations were not going well. They demand immediate surrender and compensation for 3 centuries of forced tribute, Mi Young reported to Earth Command. The Confederation officers are refusing, claiming they were just following orders. What's the fleet commander's position? Admiral Taemin asked. Captain Mortek claims his ships are non-combatant vessels on a routine patrol mission. He's requesting safe passage to return to Confederation space. And the consortium's response? They're pointing out that his non-combatant vessels include 2 heavy cruisers and a battle carrier. They don't believe his ships pose no threat. This was the pattern across much of the galaxy. Former client species were understandably angry about centuries of exploitation, while Confederation forces claimed they were just soldiers following orders. The potential for violence was enormous. Sir, communications specialist Sang Hoon called. Out from his station, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Vega listening post. The Centauri Republic is requesting immediate humanitarian assistance. President Minho looked up sharply. What kind of assistance? Medical supplies, sir. They're reporting an outbreak of Regelian fever in their outer colonies. Normally they would receive vaccines from the Confederation Medical Service, but the medical service can't reach them because the gates are down, President Minho finished. How bad is the outbreak? Preliminary reports suggest tens of thousands of cases, with the number growing rapidly. This was exactly the kind of consequence that Earth's planners had feared. Breaking the Confederation's political control was one thing, but the disruption to essential services could kill innocent people who had nothing to do with the political situation. Dr. Dong Hyun, President Minho said into his communicator, how quickly can you restore selective gate access? Give me 6 hours, came the reply from the Alpine facility. We can create secure corridors for humanitarian traffic while keeping military vessels locked out. Do it. And coordinate with Dr. Hyejin to identify other systems that might need emergency assistance. The work that followed was some of the most complex ever attempted by human engineers. Creating selective access to the gate network required them to essentially rewrite the fundamental control protocols that governed hyperspace travel. They had to distinguish between military and civilian vessels, identify legitimate humanitarian needs, and prevent the Confederation from exploiting the access corridors for military purposes. But within 12 hours, the first humanitarian convoys were moving through carefully controlled gate routes. Medical supplies reached the Centauri colonies. Food shipments began flowing to Confederation worlds facing starvation. Essential materials moved between systems that had been cut off from their suppliers. The galaxy watched in amazement as the species that had brought down the Confederation began providing the very services that the Confederation could no longer deliver. Admiral Zefkan, still trapped in the Rigel system, received a transmission that changed his understanding of the situation completely. This is Captain Yun Seo of the Earth vessel Defiance, the message began. Admiral Zefkan, you and your fleet are hereby offered safe passage to return to Confederation space through a humanitarian corridor that will open in 6 hours. What's the catch? Zefkan asked suspiciously when he responded. No catch, Captain Yun Seo replied. Your weapon systems will be remotely disabled during transit, and you'll be escorted by our vessels to ensure you don't threaten civilian traffic, but you'll be allowed to return home safely. Why? Because this isn't about revenge, Admiral, it's about freedom. 6 months after the collapse of the Galactic Confederation, the galaxy was a very different place. Where once there had been a single oppressive government controlling hundreds of species, now there were dozens of independent nations trying to figure out how to work together without destroying each other. Ambassador Wu Jin stood before the largest gathering of alien representatives in galactic history. The emergency assembly had been called on the neutral world of Haven, a planet that had declared independence from the Confederation in the first week after the gate shut down. Representatives from 847 different worlds had come to discuss the future of interstellar civilization. Friends and colleagues, Wu Jin began, his words being translated into dozens of languages simultaneously. We are here because the old order has fallen, and we must decide together what will replace it. The assembly hall buzzed with conversation in 100 different tongues. Some species were celebrating their newfound freedom, while others worried about the chaos that freedom had brought. Without the Confederation's iron control, some regions of the galaxy had descended into warfare as old grudges and territorial disputes resurged. The humans broke our chains, declared Representative Velnira of the Centauri Republic, but they also broke the systems that kept our worlds connected. How do we maintain trade and communication without the gate network? More importantly, added Minister Kolvash of the Rigel colonies, how do we prevent another empire from rising to replace the Confederation? What stops Earth from becoming the new galactic overlords? This was the question everyone wanted answered, but few dared to ask directly. Earth had demonstrated the power to control the galaxy's most essential technology. They could restore gate, access to their allies, and deny it to their enemies. By any historical measure, they should have used this power to build their own empire. Instead, they had called this assembly to give that power away. Earth's proposal is unprecedented, Wu Jin continued, activating a holographic display that showed the technical specifications of gate technology. We are offering to share complete hyperspace gate technology with any species that agrees to a simple charter of non-aggression and mutual cooperation. The hall fell silent. Complete technology transfer was unheard of in galactic politics. Species guarded their technological advantages jealously, using them to maintain political and economic superiority over their neighbors. What are your conditions? Asked Chancellor Morden of the Vegan Alliance, suspicion clear in his voice. Minister Yunji, Earth's chief diplomatic officer, stood to answer. The Soul Accords require 3 commitments. First, signatory species agree not to attack each other or interfere in each other's internal affairs. Second, they agree to provide mutual assistance in case of natural disasters or humanitarian crises. Third, they agree to share basic scientific and medical knowledge for the benefit of all. That's all? Representative Velnira looked skeptical. No tribute payments, no military service requirements, no territorial concessions? That's all, Wu Jin confirmed. The gate network will be managed by a joint council with representatives from all signatory species. No single world or government will have the power to shut down travel for political reasons. Dr. Tae Young, who had been appointed as Earth's Director of Gate Technology, provided the technical details. The new system will be completely decentralized. Each participating world will maintain its own gate infrastructure, but all gates will use compatible protocols. Even if relations break down between some species, the network as a whole will continue to function. The debates that followed were intense and sometimes heated. Some species wanted stronger enforcement mechanisms to prevent cheating. Others worried that the accords were too restrictive and would limit their sovereignty. A few representatives openly questioned whether humans could be trusted to honor their promises, but gradually, consensus began to emerge. The alternative to the Seoul Accords was a return to isolation and conflict. Without some form of cooperation, the galaxy would fragment into hundreds of competing powers, each struggling to maintain their own limited sphere of influence. The Centauri Republic was the first to sign, followed quickly by the Rigel colonies and the Vegan Alliance. Within a week, 412 worlds had agreed to the new system. The remaining holdouts included most of the former Confederation core worlds, who were still hoping to restore their old empire, and a few militant species who preferred to rely on military strength rather than diplomacy. Director Tae Young oversaw the gradual restoration of interstellar travel under the new protocols. It was delicate work, requiring careful coordination between dozens of different technological standards and political systems. But slowly, trade routes reopened, communications networks came back online, and the galaxy began to function again. The former Confederation core worlds faced a harsh reality. Without their enforced tribute system, many of their homeworlds couldn't sustain their populations. The industrial planet of Forge, which had depended on resources from 12 different mining colonies, saw its production drop by 80% when those colonies chose to sell their materials to other buyers. It was humanitarian coordinator Mi Young who organized the relief efforts for these struggling worlds. Despite everything the Confederation had done, Earth refused to let entire populations starve out of spite. They may have been our oppressors, Mi Young explained to the Earth Council, but they're ordinary citizens or just people trying to survive. If we let them suffer when we have the power to help, how are we any better than they were? The relief operations were massive undertakings. Earth ships carried food to worlds facing famine, medical supplies to systems dealing with disease outbreaks, and technical assistance to communities struggling to adapt to their new independence. The irony was lost on no one. The species that had overthrown the galactic government was now providing the services that government could no longer deliver. Admiral Tae-min, now heading the Joint Species Defense Force, worked to maintain peace in regions where old conflicts were resurging. The new military organization was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before, a truly multinational force with officers and crew from dozens of different species, all working together to prevent wars rather than to conquer territory. The key difference, Taemin explained to a gathering of military leaders, is that we're not trying to impose our will on anyone. We're here to protect the right of each species to determine their own future, as long as they don't try to deny that same right to others. Not everyone was happy with the new arrangements. Some former Confederation officials, led by the remnants of high command, attempted to organize a counter-revolution. They established a base in the Outer Rim and began recruiting ships and personnel for what they called the restoration of legitimate government. The challenge came 18 months after the original gate shut down, when a fleet of 200 ships emerged from hiding and attacked the Altair Mining Consortium. The former Confederation forces expected an easy victory against a newly independent world with limited defenses. Instead, they found themselves facing a coordinated response from 17 different species. Ships from the Centauri Republic, the Rigel colonies, the Vegan Alliance, and a dozen other worlds converged on Altair within hours. The joint defense force that Admiral Taemin had been building proved its effectiveness in its first real test. "This is not how galactic warfare is supposed to work," complained Admiral Velcroz, the leader of the Confederation remnants, as his forces found themselves completely outnumbered. "Species are supposed to compete with each other, not cooperate against us." "Maybe that's why your system failed," Captain Yunseo replied over the communications channel. "You built an empire based on fear and oppression. We're building a community based on mutual benefit." The battle was over within 6 hours. Most of the Confederation ships surrendered when they realized they were facing impossible odds. The few that tried to fight were quickly disabled by the superior coordination and technology of the joint force. But even in victory, the Allied response was measured. The captured Confederation personnel were offered the same choice that had been given to others: return to civilian life on their homeworlds or face trial for specific crimes they had committed. Only the most serious war criminals were prosecuted, and even they were treated according to galactic standards of justice. A year later, President Minho addressed the second annual assembly of the Seoul Accords. The membership had grown to over 600 worlds, representing more than 90% of the galaxy's inhabited systems. Trade was flourishing. Scientific cooperation had led to breakthroughs in medicine and engineering, and armed conflicts had decreased to their lowest levels in recorded history. The demands crossed a line, President Minho explained to the assembled representatives. But our response was never about revenge. It was about freedom, your freedom, our freedom, and the freedom of every species to choose cooperation over domination. Even some former Confederation worlds had begun to join the new system. The industrial world of Forge, after struggling for 2 years to survive without its tribute income, applied for membership and began trading its manufacturing capabilities for the raw materials it needed.